There's a moment that happens to almost everyone, usually in the quiet hours when the world has settled and your mind starts wandering. You look at your life and notice a pattern that feels both familiar and frustrating. Projects half-finished, dreams deferred, opportunities that slipped through your fingers not because you lacked ability, but because something invisible held you back. You might call it procrastination, and you wouldn't be wrong, but you also wouldn't be seeing the whole picture. Carl Jung, the revolutionary psychiatrist who mapped the hidden territories of human consciousness, understood something profound about these patterns of avoidance that most people never recognize. He discovered that what we call procrastination is often not a failure of willpower or discipline, but rather a sophisticated psychological defense system that was developed in childhood to protect us from something far more painful than the inconvenience of missed deadlines. Jung spent decades exploring what he called the archaeology of the soul, understanding how our earliest experiences create what he termed feeling-toned complexes, autonomous clusters of emotions, memories, and behaviors that continue to operate within our unconscious mind throughout our entire lives. These complexes don't just influence our thoughts, they direct our actions, often in ways that seem mysterious or self-defeating to our conscious awareness. Modern neuroscience has validated Jung's insights in remarkable ways. Research shows that childhood experiences of shame literally reshape the developing brain, creating neural pathways that associate visibility and achievement with emotional danger. The anterior cingulate cortex, which processes emotional pain, shows heightened activity in adults who experience chronic shame in childhood, even when they're simply contemplating tasks that might result in evaluation by others. But here's what makes Jung's understanding so revolutionary. He recognized that these patterns of avoidance aren't character flaws or moral failings. They're intelligent adaptations that served crucial protective functions when we were young and vulnerable. The child who learned that being seen led to criticism, mockery, or rejection developed procrastination as a way of staying emotionally safe. The problem is that these protective strategies often outlive their usefulness, creating limitations in adult life that feel impossible to overcome. If you've ever found yourself paralyzed by a task that should be simple, if you've wondered why you sabotage your own success, if you've felt like there's an invisible force that prevents you from fully showing up in your life, then understanding Jung's insights about the relationship between childhood shame and adult procrastination could transform not just your productivity, but your entire relationship with your own potential. Before we explore these profound discoveries that have helped thousands understand and heal the hidden roots of their self-sabotage, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications if you value depth over quick fixes. This channel is dedicated to exploring the psychological truths that can genuinely change how you experience your inner world. Now let's discover what Carl Jung understood about how the shame we absorbed as children becomes the procrastination that limits us as adults, and how this understanding becomes the key to finally breaking free from patterns that have held you back for far too long. Jung's exploration of childhood shame begins with his revolutionary understanding of what he called the wounded child archetype. This isn't just a therapeutic concept, it's a fundamental pattern of human experience that Jung observed across cultures and throughout history. The wounded child represents the part of our psyche that carries the emotional injuries from our earliest years, along with the creative adaptations we developed to survive those injuries. Jung discovered that shame operates differently from other emotions because it attacks the core sense of self rather than just specific behaviors. When a child experiences shame, they don't just feel bad about what they did, they feel bad about who they are. This creates what Jung called existential anxiety, a deep-seated fear that their very being is somehow flawed or unacceptable. The child's developing psyche, faced with this unbearable feeling, creates what Jung termed compensatory mechanisms, psychological strategies designed to avoid future experiences of shame. One of the most common and sophisticated of these mechanisms is what we now recognize as procrastination. By avoiding completion, the child, and later the adult, never has to face the possibility of judgment, criticism, or rejection. Jung observed that these shame-based complexes operate with what he called autonomous functionality. They're like separate personalities within our psyche, complete with their own emotional responses, belief systems, and behavioral patterns. When one of these complexes gets activated by a trigger in our current environment, it can completely take over our conscious awareness. leaving us feeling hijacked by emotions and reactions that seem to come from nowhere. This is why procrastination often feels so irrational and frustrating. Your conscious mind knows that the task needs to be done, that the deadline is approaching, that the consequences of delay will be worse than the discomfort of taking action. But the shame-based complex operates from a different logic altogether. Its primary concern isn't rational, it's survival. And if being seen, evaluated, or judged feels like a threat to survival, then avoidance becomes not just reasonable, but necessary. Jung's concept of psychological time becomes crucial for understanding how childhood shame influences adult behavior. Unlike chronological time, which moves linearly from past to present to future, psychological time is cyclical and layered. The child who experienced shame at age 5 continues to exist within your psyche, experiencing current situations through the emotional lens of that 5-year-old's reality. This explains why certain types of tasks or opportunities can trigger such intense avoidance responses. When your boss asks you to present your ideas at a meeting, your adult mind might see it as a career opportunity. But if your inner 5-year-old remembers being laughed at or criticized for speaking up, that part of your psyche will interpret the presentation as a threat and activate the procrastination response to keep you safe. Modern research on what neuroscientists call implicit memory validates Jung's insights. These are memories that are stored in the body and emotional brain without conscious awareness. They influence our behavior and emotional responses without us realizing why. A particular tone of voice, facial expression, or environmental cue can activate these implicit memories, triggering the same shame-based responses that were adaptive in childhood but are limiting in adult life. Jung's method of active imagination provides a powerful tool for working with these shame-based complexes. Active imagination involves consciously dialoguing with the autonomous aspects of your psyche, treating them not as problems to be solved, but as inner characters with their own perspectives and needs. When applied to procrastination patterns, this might involve having a conversation with the part of you that avoids challenging tasks, asking what it's afraid of and what it needs to feel safe. This approach transforms procrastination from a moral failing into a communication from your unconscious mind. Instead of criticizing yourself for avoiding a task, you can become curious about what emotional information the avoidance is carrying. What does this task represent? What does completion mean to the wounded child within you? What would happen if you were truly seen and evaluated? Jung's understanding of projection becomes relevant here as well. Often, our fear of judgment isn't based on realistic assessment of current circumstances, but on unconscious projection of past experiences onto present situations. The teacher who criticized you harshly in 3rd grade may be long gone, but the emotional impact of that experience gets projected onto current authority figures, making ordinary workplace interactions feel threatening. The concept of introjection is equally important. This refers to the process by which we unconsciously internalize the critical voices from our childhood environment. The parent who said you're too sensitive, the teacher who called you lazy, the sibling who mocked your creative efforts, these external voices become internalized as what Jung called the inner critic. This inner critic then perpetuates the shame cycle by providing constant commentary on your performance, worthiness, and potential for success. Jung observed that healing requires what he called conscious suffering, the willingness to experience difficult emotions without immediately trying to escape or numb them. For procrastination patterns rooted in childhood shame, this means learning to stay present with the anxiety, fear, or vulnerability that arise when you consider taking action on something meaningful. This conscious suffering isn't masochistic, it's therapeutic. When you can stay present with the uncomfortable feelings without immediately procrastinating to avoid them, you begin to build what modern therapists call distress tolerance. You learn that feelings, no matter how intense, are temporary and survivable. This gradually weakens the association between visibility and danger that drives procrastination patterns. Jung's concept of the transcendent function describes the psyche's natural capacity for healing and integration that emerges when conscious awareness meets unconscious content in a constructive way. In the context of shame-based procrastination, the transcendent function manifests when you can hold space for both your adult capability and your inner child's fear, allowing them to coexist without one dominating the other. This might look like acknowledging, part of me is excited about this project and confident in my abilities, and part of me is terrified of being judged and wants to hide. Instead of trying to eliminate either perspective, you learn to hold both, creating internal space for the complexity of your actual experience, rather than trying to force yourself into a false sense of confidence or motivation. The somatic dimension of shame was something Jung understood intuitively, though modern trauma research has provided more explicit understanding of how emotional experiences get stored in the body. Shame creates specific patterns of physical contraction, tightening in the chest, hunching of the shoulders, dropping of the head that persist into adulthood as what Jung called body armor. These physical patterns often activate automatically when we approach tasks that might result in evaluation or visibility. Your body remembers the posture of shame from childhood and recreates it in adult situations, even when there's no actual threat present. Learning to recognize and gently shift these physical patterns can be a powerful intervention for breaking procrastination cycles. Jung's understanding of dreams becomes particularly relevant for healing shame-based procrastination. Dreams often contain direct communications from the wounded child archetype, offering both information about what needs healing and guidance about how to proceed. Many people find that as they begin working consciously with their procrastination patterns, their dreams become more vivid and informative about the emotional roots of their avoidance. Keeping a dream journal specifically focused on themes of performance, evaluation, hiding, or exposure can provide ongoing insights into how your unconscious mind is processing shame and what it might need to feel safer about visibility and achievement. Jung emphasized that dream work should be approached with curiosity rather than forced interpretation, allowing the images and symbols to reveal their meaning organically. The creative dimension of healing shame-based procrastination was central to Jung's therapeutic approach. He observed that creative expression provides a natural pathway for integrating unconscious contents that can't be reached through rational analysis alone. When procrastination is rooted in fear of having your authentic self seen and judged, engaging in creative activities that feel personally meaningful can gradually rebuild your comfort with visibility and expression. This doesn't require artistic talent or elaborate projects. Even simple creative activities like journaling, doodling, singing, or rearranging your living space can provide your inner child with opportunities for expression and visibility that feel safer than formal evaluation contexts. The key is approaching creativity as play rather than performance, allowing your authentic self to emerge without the pressure of external judgment. Jung's concept of individuation, the lifelong process of becoming who you truly are, provides the larger framework within which healing shame-based procrastination occurs. Individuation requires developing what Jung called conscious personality, the capacity to make choices based on your authentic values and desires, rather than automatic reactions to unconscious complexes. For people struggling with procrastination, individuation often involves distinguishing between tasks that align with their authentic nature and those that they're pursuing out of internalized expectations or shoulds. Many people discover that their procrastination disappears when they're working on projects that genuinely reflect their values and interests, while it intensifies around activities that feel imposed or inauthentic. This doesn't mean you can avoid all tasks that don't perfectly align with your passion, but it does mean developing the capacity to recognize when procrastination is serving as a warning signal that you're moving away from your authentic path. Sometimes the solution isn't better time management, it's course correction toward activities that feel more genuinely expressive of who you are. Jung's understanding of collective unconscious suggests that individual healing serves larger purposes beyond personal productivity. When you heal your own shame-based procrastination patterns, you're not just improving your own life, you're also interrupting generational patterns that might otherwise be passed on to future generations. You're also contributing to a cultural shift away from shame-based motivation toward more sustainable and humane approaches to achievement and success. The relationship between perfectionism and procrastination was something Jung understood through his concept of the pure eternus, the eternal child archetype that refuses to fully engage with earthly responsibilities out of fear of limitation or failure. This archetype represents the part of the psyche that would rather maintain potential than risk the imperfection that comes with actual engagement. Jung observed that this dynamic often stems from childhood experiences, where love and acceptance were conditional on exceptional performance. The child learns that being ordinary or making mistakes is dangerous, so they develop strategies to avoid situations where their limitations might be exposed. Procrastination becomes a way of preserving the fantasy of perfection by never fully testing it against reality. Healing this pattern requires developing what Jung called amor fati, love of one's fate, including the messy, imperfect, sometimes disappointing aspects of actual engagement with life. This involves learning to find meaning and satisfaction in process, rather than just outcomes, in effort rather than just results, in growth rather than just achievement. The social dimension of shame-based procrastination relates to Jung's understanding of how individual psychological patterns both reflect and influence collective cultural dynamics. We live in a culture that often uses shame as a motivational tool, creating environments where visibility and achievement feel inherently risky rather than naturally rewarding. Healing individual shame-based procrastination often requires developing conscious awareness of these cultural dynamics and making intentional choices about which environments and relationships support your authentic expression versus those that perpetuate shame-based patterns. This might involve setting boundaries with people who use criticism as their primary form of feedback, or seeking out communities that celebrate effort and growth rather than just exceptional outcomes. Jung's concept of conscious relationship becomes crucial for sustainable healing of procrastination patterns. This involves developing the capacity to relate consciously to your own procrastination rather than just trying to eliminate it. When you can observe your avoidance patterns with curiosity rather than judgment, you gain access to valuable information about what you need to feel emotionally safe enough to take action. This might involve recognizing that you procrastinate more when you're tired, stressed, or dealing with other life challenges, and adjusting your expectations accordingly. It might mean identifying specific types of tasks or contexts that consistently trigger avoidance and developing personalized strategies for approaching them. It definitely means treating your procrastination as intelligent communication from your unconscious, rather than evidence of character deficiency. The spiritual dimension of Jung's approach recognizes that shame-based procrastination often reflects disconnection from what he called the numinous experiences of meaning, purpose, and transcendence that give life deeper significance. When we're disconnected from sense of larger purpose, individual tasks feel arbitrary, and motivation becomes difficult to sustain. Healing shame-based procrastination often involves reconnecting with activities and goals that feel personally meaningful rather than just externally rewarded. This might involve volunteering for causes you care about, pursuing creative projects that express your authentic interests, or simply spending more time in activities that connect you to sense of wonder and aliveness. Jung observed that many psychological symptoms resolve naturally when people reconnect with activities that feel genuinely nourishing rather than just productive. The procrastination that seemed so stubborn around obligatory tasks often disappears when you're engaged in activities that feed your soul rather than just your resume. The integration phase of healing shame-based procrastination involves what Jung called holding the tension of opposites. This means developing the capacity to contain both your desire to achieve and your fear of visibility, both your adult capabilities and your inner child's vulnerabilities, both your ambitions and your need for emotional safety. This integration doesn't mean eliminating the cautious, protective aspects of yourself. It means developing conscious relationship with them so they can serve their protective function without completely controlling your behavior. You might still feel nervous about presentations or anxious about submitting creative work, but these feelings no longer automatically translate into avoidance. They become information that helps you prepare appropriately and care for yourself through challenging experiences. The daily practice dimension of this work involves developing what Jung called conscious attention to unconscious processes. This means regularly checking in with yourself about what you're feeling and needing, especially when you notice procrastination arising. Instead of criticizing yourself for avoiding tasks, you can become curious about what the avoidance is trying to communicate. This might involve daily journaling about your emotional responses to different activities, paying attention to which environments and relationships support your authentic expression, or simply pausing when you notice procrastination to ask what your inner child might be afraid of in the moment. These practices help maintain conscious connection with your own internal process rather than operating on automatic pilot. Jung emphasized that psychological healing is not a destination, but an ongoing process of conscious relationship with yourself. Healing shame-based procrastination doesn't mean never struggling with motivation again. It means developing the tools and awareness to work skillfully with whatever arises, treating your psychological patterns as valuable information rather than problems to be solved. The ripple effects of healing individual shame-based procrastination extend far beyond personal productivity. When you learn to approach your own avoidance patterns with curiosity and compassion rather than judgment, you naturally become more patient and understanding with others who struggle with similar challenges. You stop perpetuating shame-based approaches to motivation in your relationships with family members, colleagues, or anyone else in your life. You also become a living example that change is possible, that patterns that seemed fixed and unchangeable can actually shift through conscious attention and compassionate self-relationship. This gives others permission to approach their own struggles with more gentleness and hope. For those who recognize themselves in this exploration of shame-based procrastination, Jung's message is ultimately one of profound hope and practical possibility. The patterns that have held you back aren't evidence of personal deficiency. They're evidence of psychological intelligence that adapted to challenging circumstances in the best way it knew how. Your procrastination has served important protective functions, keeping you safe from experiences that once felt threatening. The healing process involves appreciating this intelligence while gradually updating your internal assessment of what's actually safe and dangerous in your current life circumstances. This updating happens not through forcing yourself to ignore your fears, but through providing your inner child with evidence that visibility and achievement can be safe when approached with appropriate care and support. Each time you take a small step towards something meaningful, despite feeling afraid, you're providing this evidence. Each time you treat your own vulnerability with gentleness rather than harshness, you're building internal safety. The transformation that emerges from this work is often subtle but profound. Instead of dramatic personality changes, you may notice that tasks that once felt overwhelming become manageable. Projects that used to trigger intense avoidance begin to feel like natural expressions of your interests and capabilities. The gap between your intentions and your actions narrows not through force but through increasing alignment between your conscious goals and your unconscious sense of safety. Jung understood that this kind of healing serves purposes larger than individual achievement. When adults heal their own shame-based patterns, they become capable of creating environments where children can develop healthy relationships with challenge, effort, and visibility. They interrupt generational cycles of shame-based motivation and contribute to cultural evolution toward more humane and sustainable approaches to human development. Your procrastination isn't your enemy. It's a messenger from parts of yourself that learn to equate visibility with vulnerability and achievement with danger. These parts have been trying to protect you in the best way they knew how, but they're operating from outdated information about what's actually safe in your current circumstances. The healing process involves updating this information, not through rational argument, but through consistent experiences of being seen and accepted for who you truly are. This happens through conscious relationship with yourself, through creative expression that feels meaningful, through relationships that support your authentic nature, and through gradually expanding your comfort zone in ways that honor both your capabilities and your vulnerabilities. As Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." Healing shame-based procrastination is part of claiming this privilege, part of stepping into the fullness of your own potential, not despite your sensitivity and vulnerability, but because of the depth and authenticity these qualities bring to everything you create. Your inner child has been waiting not for you to become fearless, but for you to become trustworthy, reliable enough to stay present with their fears while still moving toward what matters to you. This trustworthiness develops through practice, through small acts of self-compassion, through treating your own procrastination as valuable communication rather than character failure. The journey isn't always linear or comfortable, but it leads to a way of being in the world that honors both your need for emotional safety and your desire for meaningful expression. This is the gift that Jung discovered and that thousands have experienced. When you heal the shame that drives procrastination, you don't just become more productive, you become more fully yourself, more capable of creating and contributing from a place of authentic enthusiasm rather than anxious obligation. The work begins now, with whatever small gesture of kindness you can offer to the part of yourself that learn to hide to stay safe. Trust that this kindness, offered consistently with genuine intention, has the power to transform not just your relationship with tasks and goals, but your entire experience of what it means to be visible, valuable, and worthy of taking up space in the world.